Perhaps you are lying awake tonight because your mind feels like a workshop that never closes. You may be running your thoughts over the mistakes of the day, looking for places where you fell short. You examine the words you spoke, the reactions you could not control, and the goals you did not reach. It is a quiet, heavy exhaustion that comes from trying to edit your own character before the morning arrives. You have been treating your life like a construction project that is never quite ready for you to live in. Every evening becomes an inspection, and every morning becomes a demand to be sharper, kinder, and more efficient. This constant internal effort can make the night feel very lonely. It feels as though you are a sculptor standing over a block of stone, striking it again and again to force it into a shape that finally deserves peace. Let the room become dark around you now. Notice the cool evening air as it brushes against your face. The world outside your window has stopped asking for results, and the shadows in the corner of the room are perfectly still. Let your back settle against the mattress, feeling the deep support of the floorboards beneath you. You can feel the heavy pull of gravity, inviting your limbs to lose their stiffness. There is a faint scent of pine or damp earth drifting from the night outside, reminding the room that nature does not rush its creations. Your chest rises and falls without any guidance from your will. The blanket holds you just as you are, demanding no adjustments and asking for no improvements before it offers its warmth. You are not a broken ornament that needs to be glued back together tonight. What you are experiencing is not a failure of character, but simply the fatigue of a heart that has carried a heavy chisel for too long. Tonight, we are not going to force your thoughts to stop. We will not try to fix a single flaw, and we will not draft a blueprint for a better version of you tomorrow. The mind does not find stillness by carving away its natural shape. True peace arrives when you finally drop the iron tools of self-correction, allowing the raw grain of your life to rest exactly as it is. There is a strange paradox in our suffering. We believe that if we criticize ourselves long enough, we will eventually become perfect and finally find rest. Yet, this relentless pressure to improve is the very thing that splits our inner quietness. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that you do not achieve a peaceful mind by defeating your flaws. You find peace when you stop treating your natural self as an enemy that must be conquered. The struggle to sculpt an ideal identity is what exhausts you, not the reality of who you are. Beneath all the layers of polish you try to give yourself, there is a solid, quiet presence that has never needed to be altered. Think of how much energy it takes to maintain an appearance of constant readiness. You watch your posture, you curate your speech, and you reprimand your mind whenever a difficult emotion arises. When anxiety shows up, you try to smooth it over. When sadness appears, you try to build a wall around it. This continuous effort to carve yourself into a flawless monument creates a deep, internal friction. The iron of your self-judgment hits the soft wood of your humanity, leaving deep marks and scattering sharp fragments across your mind. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. It will introduce us to a way of looking at our imperfections without any desire to remove them. But for right now, let your hands open on the sheets. Notice the tension in your fingers, the slight curl of your palms that shows how tightly you have been gripping your daily burdens. You do not need to hold anything together right now. The night is large enough to carry your fatigue, and the bed is steady enough to hold your weight without any help from you. Let a slow breath move into your body, feeling the cool air expand your ribs. As you let the breath go, imagine that you are putting down a heavy tool. The iron blade is cold, and your fingers are tired from holding it. Let it slide out of your hands and fall onto the ground. You do not need to carve a single line into your soul tonight. You do not have to settle your accounts, and you do not have to prove your worth to the darkness. Maybe you have spent years believing that your raw nature is insufficient. You look at other people who seem perfectly formed, like polished pillars in a grand palace hall. You see their smooth surfaces, their straight lines, and their gleaming lacquer. Then you look inside yourself and see knots, rough bark, and uneven grain. You assume that these natural patterns are defects that must be hidden or cut out. You wear yourself down trying to sand away the textures that make you human, forgetting that a tree grows by adding rings, not by removing them. The weight of this night does not mean you have failed. It simply means your spirit is asking you to pause the work. You can let the dust settle on the floor of your mind. Let the unpolished aspects of your thoughts remain just as they are in this darkness. The knots in your wood, the twists in your grain, and the rough surface of your exhaustion do not make you less valuable. They are simply the record of the seasons you have survived. Listen to the absolute silence that fills the gaps between my words. That silence does not require you to be anything other than a breathing presence. The bed does not judge the shape of your body, and the darkness does not measure the quality of your thoughts. You are safe enough to soften the rigid boundaries you have placed around your heart. Let the breath come and go like a slow wave against a quiet shore, natural and uncarved. Close your eyes and let your mind drift away from the familiar walls of your room. We are going to travel to a place where the air smells deeply of wet soil and crushed pine needles. Imagine a deep mountain valley, wrapped in the cool mist of late evening. High on the ridge sits an old temple workshop built entirely of raw, unpainted timber. The roof is heavy with dark clay tiles, and the wide wooden doors are open to the night air. Inside this workshop, the shadows are long and thick. A single oil lantern hangs from a rafter, casting a warm golden light over a floor covered in pale wood shavings. In the center of the room stands Anju. He is a young novice who has spent the last 3 years learning the art of temple carpentry. Tonight, he is entirely exhausted. His shoulders are tightly raised toward his ears, and his breathing is shallow. His hands are covered in chalk dust and small cuts. Anju is standing over a massive log of mountain cypress. This log has been chosen to become the central support pillar for the new meditation hall. Anju believes that because it is meant for a sacred space, the pillar must be absolutely flawless. He has decided that it must be a perfect, smooth cylinder, free from any rough textures or uneven lines. For hours, he has been swinging a heavy wooden mallet, driving a sharp iron chisel into the wood. He is trying to strip away everything he considers ugly. But halfway down the length of the trunk, there is a stubborn, twisted knot. It is dark and dense, swirling in unpredictable patterns. Every time Anju tries to carve it smooth, the iron blade catches in the grain. The wood splinters, leaving jagged edges. The more Anju strikes the wood, the worse it looks. Frustration burns in his chest. He tightens his grip on the handle of the chisel, his knuckles turning white. He strikes the wood harder, determined to force the knot to disappear. He feels a rising panic in his throat. He tells himself that if he cannot make this pillar perfect, he is a failure. He believes his worth as a student is entirely dependent on his ability to remove every flaw from the wood. He does not realize that he is treating the cypress log exactly the way he treats his own mind. He is trying to violently cut away his own natural texture to achieve an impossible standard of perfection. The rhythmic sound of his mallet echoes loudly into the quiet mountain night. Thwack! Thwack! He strikes the wood again and again, sweating despite the chill in the air. He is entirely trapped in his own cycle of effort and self-judgment. He does not hear the soft sound of footsteps approaching the open doorway. Master Soren steps over the threshold. He is an elderly man, the head woodwright of the valley. He has worked with living timber for over 70 years. His face is lined with deep wrinkles, and his hands are as rough and hard as tree bark. He wears a simple faded robe that smells permanently of cedar sap and wood smoke. Master Soren does not announce his presence. He simply stands in the shadows for a long time, watching his young student fight a war against the wood. Anju finally stops to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He notices the old man standing there. The young novice freezes, his heart sinking with shame. He immediately drops his mallet and bows his head. He looks at the splintered, ruined section of the log, entirely certain that he is about to be scolded. He waits for the master to tell him he is unskilled, impatient, and unworthy of the task. But the old woodwright says nothing about failure. He walks slowly across the room, his straw sandals making a soft brushing sound against the wood shavings on the floor. He stops beside the massive cypress log and rests his rough hand gently on the jagged knot. He traces the deep, swirling lines with his thumb. From the wide sleeve of his robe, Master Soren pulls out a small, beautiful object. It is a sumitsubo, an ancient master carpenter tool. It is a small wooden ink pot, carved in the shape of a sleeping crane. Inside the belly of the crane is a wheel wrapped in fine silk thread. soaking in deep black ink. Master Soren looks at Anju. He gestures for the young man to take hold of the loose end of the silk thread. Anju obeys, his hands shaking slightly. The old man tells him to walk to the very top of the log and press the end of the string against the center of the wood. Anju holds it firmly in place. Master Soren then walks slowly backward, unspooling the wet black string. He pulls it tightly all the way down to the base of the heavy trunk. The silk thread hovers just an inch above the rough surface of the wood, passing directly over the stubborn knot. The string forms a perfectly straight, undeniable line through the air. With a sudden, sharp motion, the old master reaches down and plucks the tight string like a musical instrument. The silk thread snaps violently against the raw wood. Master Soren begins to wind the string back into the wooden ink pot. He points down at the surface of the cypress log. A thin, perfectly straight, wet black line now runs down the entire length of the timber. It cuts right across the chaotic, swirling grain of the knot. The master speaks for the first time. His voice is incredibly soft, rumbling like loose stones shifting deep underground. He tells Anju to look closely at the black line. He explains that the line is pure mathematics. It is a human idea, conceived in the mind, representing absolute perfection. It does not curve, it does not hesitate, and it does not make mistakes then. Master Soren points to the natural rings of the wood beneath the ink. He traces the way the grain flows wildly outward, ignoring the black line entirely. The wood swells, dips, and twists around the dense center of the knot. The old man looks softly into his student eyes. He tells Anju that the ink line is only a suggestion made by a human mind, but the grain is reality. The grain is the story of the tree. Master Soren kneels beside the splintered knot. He asks Anju if he knows what a knot actually is. Anju shakes his head, still breathing heavily from his exhaustion. The master explains that many years ago, when this cypress was just a young sapling, it was surrounded by taller, older trees. It was entirely trapped in the dark shade of the forest floor. It was starving for sunlight to survive. The young tree had to push out a new branch, forcing it through the darkness to reach the sky. The knot is not a mistake, and it is not a flaw. The knot is the exact place where the tree struggled to stay alive. It is the hardest, densest, most resilient part of the entire trunk. It is a permanent record of the tree choosing to survive the dark. The master picks up the heavy iron chisel Anju had dropped on the floor. He hands it back to the young man. He says that when you take a sharp blade and try to hollow out the knot just to obey the straight black line, you are destroying the strongest part of the wood. You are trying to erase the history of its survival, just to make it look smooth to a passing stranger. Anju stands perfectly still in the dim light of the lantern. He looks at the chisel in his hand, and then he looks at his own raw, calloused fingers. The tightness in his chest suddenly begins to break. He feels a wave of profound relief wash over his tired muscles. For years he has been stretching a harsh, unforgiving black line down the center of his own life. He has been constantly snapping the ink of perfection against his own soul, measuring how far his natural humanity strays from the ideal. Whenever he felt anxious, whenever he felt sad, whenever he failed to understand a teaching, he saw it as a terrible knot that ruined his value. He had been swinging a heavy mental chisel at his own heart every single day, trying to cut away his fears and his weariness. He realized that the exhaustion he felt tonight was not from the physical labor of carving the wood. It was the exhausting, continuous effort of trying to carve himself into a shape that did not exist in nature. Master Soren places his warm, rough hand on Anju's shoulder. He tells him to put down the tools for the night. He says that the hall does not need a perfect pillar. It needs a strong one. And true strength always includes the scars of the weather. Anju lets the heavy chisel slip from his fingers. It falls into the soft pile of shavings on the floor with a quiet thud. He lets his arms hang loosely at his sides. For the first time in months, he does not feel the need to fix anything. He listens to the wind moving through the living cedar trees outside, knowing that every single one of them is beautifully imperfect. But there was a deeper secret hiding in the grain of the wood, something Anju had not yet learned to see. The old master had more to show him about the true nature of strength, and how a heavy heart finally learns to rest. This story is not telling us to turn away from our goals, nor is it asking us to become cold and indifferent to our own lives. It is not suggesting that you should live without care, or that the path to peace requires you to flatten your personality until you feel nothing at all. The Buddhist wisdom hiding within the Woodwright workshop points towards something much quieter and more gentle. It is an invitation to look at how we relate to our own humanity, especially when the day has been heavy and the mind feels fragmented. The suffering we carry at night does not usually come from the raw facts of our day. The true heaviness lives in the rigid ink line we draw across our own hearts after the day is done. We lay down in the dark and begin to measure the distance between who we actually are and who we think we ought to be. We take out our mental chalk lines, snap them tightly against our behavior, and judge every curve in our character as a defect. The primary pain is simply being human, which means experiencing fatigue, making mistakes, and encountering limitations. But the secondary pain, the heavy wound we give ourselves, is the relentless demand that our natural timber should never contain a single knot. Think about what happens when you try to force an emotion to disappear. When fear arises in your chest, you do not simply feel the fear. You immediately try to chisel it out because you think a strong person should be perfectly calm. When sorrow touches your heart, you do not just allow the grief to wash through. You scold yourself for being weak and try to polish the surface so no one can see the fracture. This desperate grip on an idealized version of yourself is what the Buddha described as the root of our exhaustion. We turn our desire for goodness into a weapon of self-punishment, creating a continuous friction between the living wood of our reality and the iron blade of our judgment. Mindfulness, in the light of this timber metaphor, is not a complicated mental exercise or a state of forced concentration. It is simply the ability to sit beside the log of your life without holding a tool. It is the capacity to notice the swirling grain of an anxious thought or the dense center of an old regret without instantly deciding that you must cut it out. When you practice this quiet awareness, you look at your own mind with the eyes of the old master carpenter. You do not see a ruined piece of wood that needs to be violently corrected. You see a living record of everything you have survived. Every difficult memory you replay at night, every defensive habit that trips you up, and every place where your patience split today is like the dark knot in the cypress trunk. It is the exact location where you had to push through a shadow in your past just to find the light. Perhaps you had to become defensive because you were not protected. Perhaps you became perfectionistic because you felt you were only loved when you performed flawlessly. These patterns are not flaws in your character. They are the dense wood of your survival. To hate them is to hate the very strength that allowed you to reach this night. Let the realization wash over you that nothing in nature grows in a perfectly straight line. The mountain rivers twist through the valleys, the old pines bend against the ridge winds, and the stars follow paths that human blueprints cannot capture. Yet, we expect our inner lives to be perfectly symmetrical, completely predictable, and instantly smooth. We treat ourselves like lumber that has already been milled, squared, and lacquered for display, forgetting that we are still growing, still absorbing the rain, and still responding to the seasons of our lives. Letting go does not mean you abandon your journey or stop caring about wisdom. It simply means you stop turning your spiritual growth into a construction site. You put down the blue ink that demands an impossible design. You give your heart permission to have a textured surface, an uneven grain, and a heavy weight. When you release the extra struggle of trying to edit your soul in the dark, the energy you were using to fight yourself suddenly returns to you as peace. Compassion is the spaciousness that allows the knot to exist without trying to smooth it over for a spectator. It is the gentle understanding that the wood is already solid from its heartwood out to its bark. Even if the surface is rough to the touch, you do not need to earn your right to rest by presenting a flawless account of your day to the darkness. The darkness does not require you to be a finished statue. It only asks you to settle down like the heavy timber you are. Slowly, this teaching becomes deeply personal as the night grows older. We begin to see that the constant self-correction we practice is actually a form of hidden fear. We are afraid that if we stop chiseling, we will be left with something unworthy. But the ancient insight of the Buddha assures us that beneath all your frantic carving, your inherent nature is already complete. You cannot add anything to your fundamental worth with a chisel, and you cannot take anything away from it with a mistake. The timber is already whole, containing within its rings the silent strength of the entire forest. In a moment, this story will show us how to bring this soft awareness down into the very center of our breathing body. But before we move into that quiet practice, let your mind reflect on the sheer relief of being allowed to be imperfect. Let the splintered edges of your day remain exactly where they fell on the floor of your memory. You do not have to sweep them up tonight, and you do not have to account for them tomorrow. Let yourself notice the quiet space that opens up when you stop trying to fix your life. It is like the stillness that enters the workshop when the mallet is placed on the bench and the lantern flame is turned down low. The room does not become empty, it becomes vast. The silence is no longer lonely. It becomes a refuge where the living grain of your presence can finally expand in the dark. Let the weight of these insights settle quietly into the room, falling softly like the damp evening mist over the mountain workshop. You do not need to do anything with this understanding right now, and you do not have to struggle to change your habits before you fall asleep. The mind cannot be forced into peace by another act of heavy carving. True rest begins when we allow our awareness to come down from the high scaffolding of our expectations, descending into the simple reality of this breathing body. If it feels right to you, let your attention turn slowly inward, meeting yourself with the unhurried patience of an old craftsman who has put away his tools for the season. Take a slow breath in, allowing the cool air to fill your chest without any effort to control its depth. As you let the breath go, notice the subtle places where your physical form has been bracing against the day. Perhaps you can feel a tightness in the hinge of your jaw, a lingering stiffness that shows how hard you have been clenching against the unpredictability of life. You might allow the lower jaw to soften slightly, creating a tiny space between your teeth. Notice the skin around your eyes, the small muscles of the forehead that spend the day frowning over problems, and see if they can smooth out in the darkness. There is no need to achieve perfect relaxation right now, because even noticing the presence of tension is a beautiful form of awareness. Let your shoulders drop down toward the mattress, releasing the heavy timber of your collarbones. Your body has spent many hours walking beneath the invisible blueprint of your duties, carrying the constant demand to perform and correct. Right now, the mattress is completely steady beneath you, fully capable of holding your weight without any assistance from your muscles. Let the muscles along your spine unclench, feeling the deep support of the structure beneath your head and back. You do not need to stand upright. You do not need to present a poised front to the world, and you do not have to hold yourself together. You can simply allow the natural density of your body to sink down into the quiet earth. Now, let us quietly look at the workshop of your mind. As you lie perfectly still, you might notice one specific thought that has been circling through your awareness, asking for your attention. Perhaps it is a memory of a mistake you made earlier this week, or a persistent worry about an upcoming task that makes you feel unprepared. Do not try to push this thought out of the room, and do not reprimand yourself for having a restless mind. If we try to violently cut the thought away, we are only picking up the heavy iron chisel again. Instead, just let the thought be seen, observing its texture without instantly deciding that it makes you flawed. Imagine that you are holding the old master carpenter tool, the small wooden ink pot shaped like a crane. In your mind's eye, see the deep black ink resting quietly in the belly of the vessel. Now take that sharp, critical thought, that heavy expectation that says you must be different, and imagine placing it gently into the black ink pot. Let the silk thread absorb the worry, wrapping it up in the quiet, dark space inside the tool. You are not destroying the thought, and you are not pretending it never existed. You are simply removing it from the surface of your life, placing it down into a safe container, where it no longer needs to be actively managed by your conscious mind. Watch what happens when you stop gripping the thread of that self-criticism. In the stillness of your imagination, let the image of the straight black ink line begin to soften. See the ink dissolve into the natural wood, spreading outward until the harsh boundary completely disappears. The dark lines blur, turning into soft shadows that blend harmoniously with the original rings of the trunk. What looked like a sharp error becomes nothing more than a deeper shade in the natural grain of your history. The pressure to conform to a human idea fades away, leaving only the ancient, unbothered presence of the living wood. Perhaps you can feel a subtle shift in your chest as the imaginary blueprint dissolves. There is a profound emotional safety in realizing that you do not need to be fixed tonight. You can return to the present moment whenever you are ready, letting your mind rest in the rhythmic rise and fall of your chest. The breath comes in like a quiet wind moving through cedar branches, and it goes out like the fading hum of a distant temple bell. Every inhalation is a fresh ring of growth, and every exhalation is a release of the shavings that no longer serve the tree. Even if your mind still feels a little restless, even if the knots of your anxiety feel dense, you are entirely safe within this breathing space. You do not have to achieve a state of total emotional clarity before you allow your eyes to close completely. The healing we seek does not happen because we have successfully carved away all our confusion. It happens when we realize that the confusion is just a temporary weather pattern passing through our branches. The root system remains deep, the trunk remains heavy, and the heartwood remains solid. Tonight, let the dust of your efforts settle completely onto the floorboards of the mind. You can let the unresolved problems look after themselves in the dark, knowing that the grain of your life knows exactly how to hold its own weight without your constant supervision. Now, let this soft awareness guide us into a deeper stillness. The workshop has grown very dark, and the night air is cool against your skin. As the body becomes heavier and the thoughts become more spacious, we begin to approach a different kind of understanding. But the deeper transformation had not yet revealed itself to the young novice in the valley. There was still a second lesson hiding in the ancient timber of the temple, a truth that would change the way Anju understood the relationship between his hidden wounds and his ultimate endurance. The autumn seasons arrived and left the mountain valley, burying the old workshop under heavy white snowdrifts before the mountain streams thawed once more. 12 years had passed since the night the young apprentice first learned to see the resilience hidden inside a twisted wooden knot. Anju was no longer a frantic novice swinging a heavy iron tool in panic. His shoulders had settled into a natural, grounded weight, and his own skin had taken on the faint smell of pine resin and oil. Yet the deep human habit of self-polishing does not disappear by magic. The internal blueprint simply shifts its shape, hiding inside our desire to build a perfect spiritual life. Following the peaceful passing of the old woodwright, Anju was given his ultimate task. The elders asked him to construct the main entryway threshold for the great temple hall. This threshold beam was the most critical piece of architecture in the entire valley. Every monk, every visiting traveler, and every burdened soul would step across this specific piece of timber before entering the sanctuary. Anju spent months selecting the wood. He chose a massive, dense beam of ironwood, a timber so heavy it could barely float in water. Anju spent weeks using a fine hand plane to smooth the surface of the ironwood. He wanted this threshold to be completely seamless, like dark water reflecting the sky. He polished the grain with mountain stones until the wood gleamed under the torchlight. He told himself that because this was a holy boundary, it must be completely free from the rough textures of the earth. He worked until his wrists were stiff and his vision blurred in the dim light. He felt a familiar, subtle anxiety creeping back into his chest. He believed that if a single visitor stumbled over an uneven patch of grain, it would mean his internal training had failed. One evening, just before the threshold was to be permanently bolted into the stone foundation, a terrible mountain storm struck the ridge. The wind roared through the valley like a wounded beast, tearing old tiles from the roofs. The torrential rain beat down for 3 straight days, flooding the mountain paths. The extreme humidity caused the air inside the half-finished temple hall to become thick and damp. Wood, by its very nature, never truly stops breathing. Even when it is cut, dried, and planed, it retains a memory of the forest. It responds to the atmosphere around it. On the 4th morning, the storm cleared, leaving a cold mountain mist hanging over the rafters. Anju entered the main hall to inspect his masterpiece. When he knelt down and ran his fingers across the ironwood beam, His heart tightened with a sharp, familiar pain. The excessive moisture from the storm had forced the wood to swell. Because the timber was so dense, it had not expanded evenly. A long, raised ridge had formed along the center of the beam. The beautiful polished lacquer had cracked, revealing a rough, uneven texture that caught the light like a small scar. A wave of bitter disappointment rushed through his body, his mind instantly filled with fierce self-judgment. He blamed himself for not sealing the wood correctly. He blamed himself for failing to anticipate the weather. He looked at the cracked surface and saw it as a reflection of his own incomplete nature. He immediately reached for his heavy iron hand plane, determined to grind the wood down, to force it back into compliance, to scrape away the texture until it conformed to his original blueprint. He raised his arm, his muscles tightening with the old exhausting effort of resistance. But as he held the heavy iron tool above the wood, he stopped. He looked at the cracked lacquer, and then he looked at his own reflection in the wet stone floor. He saw a man who was still fighting the storm after the rain had already stopped. He remembered the old master, Soren, and the realization that the wood is not a passive object to be conquered, but a living presence that registers the seasons. Anju slowly lowered his arm. He did not drop the tool in anger, nor did he walk away in despair. Instead, he performed one small, disciplined act of profound surrender. He placed the iron plane gently on the wooden workbench. He took a deep, slow breath, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. For the first time in his life, he chose to sit down directly on the rough, swollen beam itself. He did not try to fix it. He did not try to hide it. He simply allowed his weight to rest on the wood exactly as the storm had left it. He sat there for hours in the quiet hall, listening to the drip of rainwater from the eaves. He allowed the disappointment to exist in his chest without trying to chisel it out. He allowed the uncertainty of the future to remain in the room, without demanding an immediate solution. He realized that the crack in the timber was not a structural failure. It was simply the way the ironwood had adjusted its body to hold the moisture of the earth. It was the wood finding its own balance with reality. Later that afternoon, the head abbot of the temple walked into the hall to view the progress. He was an old monk who had spent 50 years in silent meditation. He walked over to the threshold where Anju sat. The abbot knelt down and looked at the long, raised ridge and the fractured lacquer. Anju did not offer an excuse. He did not promise to sand it down by morning. He simply remained silent, holding his hands in his lap, letting the work stand naked before the master. The abbot reached out his hand, which was thin and smooth from years of holding prayer beads. He ran his fingers along the uneven ridge of the ironwood. He felt the rough texture, the small cracks, and the heavy, swollen grain. A soft smile appeared on the old monk's face. The abbot looked up at Anju and said that this threshold was truly magnificent. He explained that if the beam had remained perfectly smooth and lacquered, it would have become incredibly slippery when the mountain snows arrived. A visitor walking up the steps with wet straw sandals would lose their footing and fall upon entering the sanctuary. But this raised ridge, this rough texture created by the storm, provided the exact grip the human foot needed. The scar in the wood was the very thing that would keep the weary traveler from stumbling. Anju felt a profound warmth expand behind his ribs, a sensation that felt like the sun breaking through the mountain pine trees. The transformation within him was not a magical disappearance of his grief or his standards. It was a subtle, radical shift in how he related to the unexpected textures of his existence. He saw that the world did not require a smooth, artificial runway. The world required a surface that had survived the weather, because only a weathered surface could offer true safety to a foot that was tired from the road. He stood up, bowed deeply to the abbot, and decided to leave the threshold exactly as it was. He did not add another coat of lacquer. He did not pick up the sandpaper. He allowed the ironwood to keep its scars, knowing that every crack would soon be polished not by iron tools, but by the gentle, repetitive touch of thousands of human feet stepping into the peace of the temple. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life, moving silently into the quiet room where you are resting. The transformation we seek is never about preventing the storms from changing us. It is about learning to sit upon the altered grain of our lives without picking up the tool to scrape it away. But the psychological mechanism of this endless self-correction runs very deep within our daily habits. And to truly let it go, we must examine the hidden layers of our late-night thoughts. To truly rest, we must examine the hidden mechanism that keeps the mind spinning in the middle of the night. We often believe that we are awake because our problems are too large to be ignored. We tell ourselves that if we just analyze our faults for one more hour, we will finally discover the blueprint for a flawless life. But if you look closely at this late-night restlessness, you will find something else happening beneath the surface. The mind is trying to use shame as an instrument of healing. We treat our emotional wounds like defects in a piece of timber, believing that if we apply enough harsh friction, we can force ourselves to become worthy of love and safety. This internal habit of self-judgment is deeply connected to our fear of uncertainty. We want the future to be perfectly smooth, predictable, and fully aligned with our expectations. When life brings an unexpected storm, or when our own reactions do not match our ideal image, panic sets in. We immediately try to rewrite the past or exhaust ourselves by rehearsing tomorrow conversations. Continuous effort to maintain absolute control creates a profound inner division. We turn our own natural fatigue, our sadness, and our unresolved questions into an identity, labeling ourselves as permanently damaged wood, simply because we are currently reacting to the heavy atmospheric pressure of our lives. Buddhist wisdom offers a beautiful, clear distinction that can dissolve this exhaustion. In this life, there are two distinct forms of weight we experience. The first weight is the raw material that reality provides. It is the sudden storm, the loss of a relationship, the physical tiredness of the body, or the presence of an unexpected obstacle. This is the organic density of the wood itself, shaped by the environment. We cannot always choose the weather that touches our branches, nor can we prevent the damp air from causing our grain to expand. This initial weight is a natural part of being alive in a changing world. The second weight, however, is the extra burden the mind manufactures through resistance. This secondary heaviness is the aggressive choice to grind down the swollen wood, because we cannot tolerate its altered shape. When we tell ourselves that we should not be tired, that we must never show vulnerability, or that our life is a complete failure because a single plan cracked, we are adding a massive volume of friction to an already tender surface. The primary mark is just a natural reaction to the season, but the secondary wound is the relentless self-hatred we apply with our own hands. Peace does not arrive when you successfully engineer a life that never changes or splinters. True liberation comes when you change your fundamental relationship with the imperfections that are already present. Think of a massive tree trunk growing on a steep, wind-swept mountain ridge. The tree does not spend its nights wishing it had grown in a sheltered lowland valley. It does not look at its own twisted branches and feel a sense of failure, because its form is asymmetrical. When a heavy winter ice storm coats its bark, the tree does not fight the cold, nor does it try to force its frozen limbs to appear flexible. The tree simply allows its fibers to tighten, absorbing the frost directly into its rings. It trusts the absolute density of its own wood to hold the weight of the snow until the season shifts. The tree survives not because it remains pristine and untouched, but because it completely surrenders to the texture of the climate it occupies. When you lie awake trying to solve your entire existence, you are treating your mind like a piece of dead timber that has been warped by the moisture. You assume that your anxious thoughts are permanent truths about your identity, rather than temporary expansions caused by a passing emotional storm. You begin to confuse the weather with the wood. Every drop of fear that passes through your awareness is treated as an emergency that requires immediate carving. This continuous reaction is what keeps your heart rate high and your limbs rigid on the sheets, preventing the natural settling of your consciousness into deep sleep. What happens if you decide to stop treating your thoughts as absolute commands? What if the restlessness you feel tonight is not a sign that your life is broken, but simply a sign that you are currently absorbing a heavy season of change? You can allow the grain of this moment to run precisely where it must, without trying to force it back into a straight black line. You can look at your own confusion with the silent compassion of the old abbot, recognizing that the rough edges of your current struggle are the very details that will eventually provide you with a steadier grip on your own path. This shift in perspective is what allows the heart to soften its defenses. You begin to see that you do not need to hate yourself for being tired, and you do not need to feel guilty for failing to maintain a perfectly polished exterior. The natural self is already heavy, grounded, and inherently complete, far beneath the superficial cracks in your lacquer. When you stop feeding the secondary fire of judgment, the original pain becomes something you can easily sit with, letting it rest in the spaciousness of your quiet awareness. Slowly, this ancient understanding begins to move out of the realm of stories and enter the immediate reality of your tomorrow morning. We begin to see how this gentle surrender applies to the small, noisy moments of our daily routine, transforming the way we walk through the world. But the integration of this wisdom into modern life requires us to look at the exact places where we lose our footing during the day. Now let this ancient mountain wisdom travel down from the silent timber workshop, stepping quietly into the noisy spaces of your modern everyday life. It is very easy to practice acceptance when the room is dark and the world is asleep, but the true test of the grain happens tomorrow morning. When you step out into the daylight, you will be met by 1,000 demands to return to the construction site of your identity. The modern world is a vast gallery of highly polished pillars, constantly tempting you to measure your internal life against a row of artificial standards. You will feel the immediate pressure to hide your natural texture, to smooth over your rough days, and to present a flawless, lacquered surface to the people around you. Think of how this exhausting friction shows up in the smallest moments of your day. Perhaps you find yourself checking your phone for a message that has not arrived, feeling a rising panic because the silence feels like a criticism. In that small window of waiting, your mind immediately pulls out the chalk line, trying to figure out what you did wrong and how you can correct your behavior to win approval. Or maybe you spend your afternoon comparing your progress to the visible achievements of someone else, concluding that you are hopelessly behind because your life has a more twisted, uneven path. You smile at your colleagues while carrying a deep heaviness inside your chest, terrified that if anyone sees the raw knots of your anxiety, they will judge you as insufficient. You might feel a sharp wave of guilt whenever you try to sit still and rest, believing that you are only allowed to stop working if you have achieved total perfection. This is the modern curse of the endless self-build, the exhausting belief that your raw humanity is a problem that must be constantly managed, edited, and resolved. But the insight we gathered from the ironwood threshold reminds us that life is not lived on a flat blueprint. When a sudden disruption occurs in your schedule, or when a relationship encounters a difficult patch of weather, your inner space will naturally swell and shift. If you immediately treat that emotional swelling as a fatal flaw, you will pick up the heavy chisel of self-blame and begin to hack away at your own peace. Living with an uncarved heart means choosing a completely different way of walking through these daily pressures. Tomorrow, when a frustrating interaction threatens to split your patience, you can allow yourself to pause before you offer a forced reaction. That single moment of breathing is the exact equivalent of placing your heavy iron plane on the workbench. You are choosing not to drive the blade into the grain. You can notice the hot surge of frustration or the cold knot of fear, naming its presence without instantly deciding that you must cut it out of your character to be a good person. You are simply allowing the wood of your presence to register the change in the weather, trusting that you can hold the tension without breaking. You can begin to care deeply about your work and your loved ones without gripping the outcome so tightly that your knuckles turn white. When you release the impossible demand for an absolute, straight line through reality, you give the universe permission to have its own natural curves. You can speak your truth clearly, make your mistakes openly, and let the wood shavings of your daily errors fall harmlessly to the floor without feeling that your fundamental value has been reduced. You do not need to earn your right to occupy this space by presenting a flawless surface to the world, because the earth supports the rough bark of the living tree just as completely as it supports the polished wood of the palace. Think of how much energy will return to your spirit when you stop treating your own thoughts as absolute commands. When the internal critic starts shouting that you are not enough, you do not have to obey its blueprint. You can simply look at that thought as a wandering gust of wind that is blown through your branches, bringing a scent of distant rain, but leaving the trunk entirely unmoved. You can sit with the uncertainty of tomorrow, allowing the lacquer of your life to show its authentic textures, knowing that a weathered threshold is far safer and more resilient than a slippery artificial monument. As you prepare to leave the worries of the day behind, let this practical softness settle into the marrow of your bones. The modern world will continue to demand straight lines, but your soul is free to follow the slow, ancient rings of its own organic growth. You can allow yourself to be exactly who you are in this moment, a living piece of mountain timber that has survived the storm and is fully capable of holding its own weight. Slowly, the noise of the daylight begins to fade, and the absolute stillness of the night returns to claim the room. The practical applications of the day dissolve into the soft shadows, leaving only the deep, rhythmic movement of your breathing body. But there is still one final layer of stillness waiting for you in the deep heartwood of your consciousness, a place where all effort ceases entirely and the spirit returns to its original home. Let the workshop lights dim completely now. The high mountain ridge outside has settled into an absolute dark. The fierce wind that roared through the rafters during the day has died down, leaving only the cool evening air. The faint smell of cedar wood and damp pine needles lingers softly in the room. Your body is resting on the mattress like a heavy piece of ancient timber that has finally found the valley floor. There are no more lines to draw tonight. The black ink has dried completely inside the crane vessel, and the iron tools are sitting quietly on the distant workbench. You can feel the massive weight of your limbs sinking down, pressed safely against the firm support of the bed. Let your breathing become slower, moving with a deep and unhurried rhythm. Every breath out is a soft release of the pressure to change your nature. You do not need to guide the air, and you do not need to measure its volume. Your chest rises and falls just like the slow expansion of a living tree absorbing the midnight dew. The night does not demand that you polish your surface before you are allowed to rest. The darkness receives your heavy presence without asking for a single improvement. You are permitted to occupy this space exactly as you are. Let the thoughts in your head lose their sharp edges. The worries you carried through the hours are nothing more than loose wood shavings drifting away in the quiet air. They fall harmlessly away from your awareness, leaving the core of your being untouched and solid. You do not need to sweep the floor of your mind tonight. You do not need to arrange your memories into a neat pile for inspection. Let the rough textures and the hidden knots of your unique story remain exactly as they are. They are safe in this quiet darkness, and they require no further correction. Feel the profound peace of returning home to the deep heartwood of your own presence. This inner center has never been altered by the harsh criticisms of the world. It has never been split by your own daily mistakes. It is a solid, ancient reservoir of quiet strength that has lived beneath your efforts all along. Your hands can soften their grip completely now. Your fingers can uncurl on the sheets, releasing the invisible handles of your continuous labor. The iron has grown cold and the workshop is closed for the night. Imagine yourself sinking down into the deep moss of a silent forest floor. You are like a great timber log that has completed its long season of growth. The earth rises up to meet your weight, cradling you in the damp, fragrant soil. The rain falls gently through the high canopy above, washing away the last traces of your chalk lines. The soft moss grows over your bark, filling every small crack and smoothing every rough ridge with velvet green. You are completely still, heavy, and protected by the ancient woods. There is no blueprint to follow in this deep sleep. You do not need to plan a single movement for tomorrow morning. The daylight will bring its own wind, but tonight you are allowed to be completely untracked. Let your mind dissolve into the immense space behind the words. The silence is not an empty void, but a vast and comfortable sanctuary where your true nature can expand without boundaries. You are heavy, you are grounded, and you are breathing in perfect harmony with the night. Let the darkness wrap itself around your chest like a protective cloak. Your eyelids are incredibly heavy, pulled down by the gentle gravity of absolute surrender. There is nothing left to defend, and there is nothing left to fix. The universe holds no designs you are required to copy. You can stop solving your life for tonight. Let yourself fade into the quiet background of the forest, becoming one with the deep roots and the silent stone. What if the beautiful wholeness you have been trying to carve out of your soul was already present in the raw grain of the wood, long before you ever picked up the chisel?